NTV.
Welcome back and many thanks for staying with us right here on Morning at NTV. My name is Romeo Busiku. We are getting into another contentious conversation based on yesterday's International Day for the Elderly. We are going to be interrogating that and the social assistance grants for empowerment. Have they done enough to offer reprieve to the older persons in Uganda? Remember, old age vulnerability remains a challenge within Uganda. 71% of the households within Uganda which have an older person are either in extreme poverty or risk falling in extreme poverty. And we're also getting information that 85% of the older persons in Uganda are engaged in crop farming, but do not have any kind of social security whatsoever. And the other information we're getting is that 1.7% of these older persons do not have pension, access to any pension. Yes, 1.7. And out of that 1.7, they are almost 60% males. Where are the women? Yes, we do have Patrick Katabazi, the Executive Director for the Center of Budget and Tax Policy. He joins me right now in the studio. Very good morning, Mr. Patrick. It's always a pleasure to have you in studio.
The pleasure is always mine. Good
How have
morning.
you been?
I have been quite fine. Yes, please.
Yeah, well, we'd like to know, why is social protection very important for the elderly?
Okay, first of all, I want to congratulate the older persons on the International Day of Older Persons, which was yesterday. And this is a very important commemoration which started in 1990, and Uganda started in 1999 and has been celebrating the day ever since. It is very important to appreciate that world over now we have about 814 million older persons, and it is projected that by 2050 we shall have about 2 billion older persons, because we have fairly a very young population, and within a short span we are going to be having these so many young people graduate into old age. And that's why a day like this one is very important, because it is a constant reminder that we have very many challenges at hand. For example, if we are failing or struggling to look after older persons right now when they are still very, very, very in small numbers, what will happen then if we have these overwhelming numbers as big as 2 billion? Remember, in Uganda's circumstances, we have less than 2 million people who are above the age of 60 years. So that's about 4% of the entire population of this country. And for me, therefore, it means that over 90% of our population is extremely young. And if we do not start thinking about very, very, very strategic interventions that taps into the window of opportunity that is presented by this demographic dividend, we shall have some significant challenges ahead. So, and that's how social protection loops in.
Indeed. So let's interrogate the statistics as far as the SAGE program is concerned. We also get information that, like I mentioned in my preamble, 71% of those households that have an older person are either in poverty or risk falling into extreme poverty. 85% of the older persons are in crop farming, but without social protection. 7.1% do not, only 7% have access to social security. Where are the rest of the women in this case? And where are the rest of the older people?
Yes, so that's the vulnerability context that we have been talking about for some time. And that's why it is imperative that we start interrogating some of these issues affecting the older persons more critically. The statistics are glaring and they paint a picture. And it is from that basis that we need to start opening debate on how to deal with this problem more comprehensively. I want to give an example. Some people think that actually social protection is simply giving money to people, like direct cash transfer program like SAGE. Social protection is broad. It talks about social security. Social security could include giving a direct cash transfer or a monthly pay to somebody. But again, there's also social care. That's how health insurance or medical care loops in. We know the significant challenges that do affect older persons, and particularly in this COVID period, world over, you have seen how older persons have been grossly affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. But again, you also have other socio-economic supporting interventions. You talked about many of these older persons engaged primarily in crop
With
production.
no social security, yes.
With no social security, with no means of support. There are three fundamental challenges in production for the older persons. challenge number one is that these guys are frail, do not have the physical energy to farm. So it would mean that if they have some form of social security, then they would afford a minimum
employ
employ someone else
like
to
that.
do work on their behalf. But also it means that at that level, the third one would be lack of capital to expand operations on their smallholder farms. And of course, the other one is the issue of marketing as well, which seems to be the whole major problem relating with our market asymmetries that we have in the country. So the Malabo Declaration on Agriculture did emphasize social protection for farmers, especially those who are living in rural areas. And for me, that's where most of the problems emanate from. So social protection is broad, like I did say. The element of health is critically important. The element of production for this category of persons is very important, because we are not saying that once you grow old, like we are going to be, some of us are already old anyway, it does not mean that you expire. It does not mean that you cannot participate in the economy of your community, of your district, of your country. It does not mean that you cannot make a significant contribution to the tax base. And that's why we are saying that we need to wake up to the reality that we are now living much more than we used to be. Our life expectancy now is about 64 years. About 10 years ago was about 40 something. So when you look at the trends globally, countries like Sweden, countries like Norway, the life expectancy is coming close to 90s. So now, if you're telling people that they are retiring at 60 years, but people are now adding other 30 years, what strategies are we putting in place to ensure that within that window of 30 years, you still have people who are not merely dependents, but are making a contribution to society? And that's why the focus of debate should be.
Of course, Patrick, and you have so many economic experts who contend that we might find ourselves in some kind of cycle, because you have government that is remitting social protection like 0.78 of the GDP. We are using only 0.78% social protection of the GDP. That is very, very little. So, and we are we have about 500,000 youth in Uganda who are entering into working age at least every year. But the country is producing like 100,000 jobs. So there will be no end in sight, because these young people who are in their 30s, if you've just clocked 30 and you do not have a job, 30 years later, you're going to be retiring, or you're going to be hitting the old age. But if you do not have a job, that means you are not saving with NSSF. By the time I retire, I do not have any savings whatsoever. Do you believe that we are going to be caught up in a cycle? Because currently, only 7% of the older people have access to a pension. Right now, every year, 500,000 young people are entering the working age in a country that is producing only 100,000 jobs. Patrick, let's interrogate these issues.
Yes, I'm one of those economists who have come up with that kind of analysis. But I've also been one of those that have prescribed a solution. And for me, the solution lies in what we have called a life cycle approach.
Life cycle approach.
Yes, life cycle approach to social protection. That as a country, we need to look at the life of a human being. When a man and woman meet, a baby comes into play.
Right.
Before the baby is born, we as a community and as a country, we need to ensure that the mother is healthy. So investment in antenatal is very important. We need to ensure that the baby is born safely. So we have to deal with maternal death. And then when the baby is born, we need to ensure that nutrition aspects and development of cognitive abilities of that baby are enhanced. Because you have about 1,000 days only to have effective development of cognitive abilities of a child. If you miss it at that stage, it becomes extremely difficult to develop it much later. And that's why child care and child support is extremely important, because it is that one that defines the human capital wealth of any given country. And that's why most countries are investing in that age category.
Human capital development.
Yes, it starts at that age between 1 day and the 1,000 days. Those are effectively 3 years. Once you miss that, or if you have child stunting at that age, malnutrition at that age, you cannot, even if you provide free education, even if you provide everything, it becomes difficult to transform that human being who has missed that part into something very, very useful. So now the child goes to school. So we need to have very, very strong systems that usher children into school, give them the right skills. Now they are graduating into youth. Vocational skills come into play so that at every stage you can get something to do. And because now you are youth and you can get something to do, you have income. When you have income, you therefore need to have social security reform to ensure that that income you have, whether you are in private sector or informal sector or working for government, you have a basket where you are going to make a contribution.
Yes.
And it is that contribution that actually then comes to your rescue when you can no longer work because of old age. So now, when you're young and productive and you are working and you have a system that welcomes you by making contributions into social security basket, then now you are growing old. So when you are growing old, this money that you have contributed, some people mistake it to be saving, but you have contributed for your own social security, comes into play. You'll enjoy it. You'll become productive as you age, and then you die. That is what we've called life cycle approach. So in essence, what you're saying and what I'm saying, that the current strategies that we have may not be sustainable in the long run if we are only focusing at looking at people who have grown old without looking at the whole life cycle, the way it plays out.
The young people who might get to that old stage at some
point. So because you see now, look at this. We are struggling to maintain less than 250,000 older persons under the social assistance grants for empowerment. I'm saying we are struggling because each and every year we are having a funding gap in that area. So now imagine 20 years later, if now we have about 20 million older persons and we still have the same approach of looking at the tax resources to fund these social assistance grants without having built a mechanism that allows more people to contribute to their own social security.
Mr. Katabazi, let's interrogate the statistics on the effects on measures such as the social assistance grants for empowerment on the lives of the older persons.
I think the numerous studies have been very categorical on this, and there's growing evidence, not only in Uganda and in many countries as well, that if you have a community that is extremely vulnerable and is at risk, and you boost their income, you make income available, then you have helped those people and that community in many ways. To the person, you have brought that person to life. You've seen so many testimonies where people are saying, you know, I would have died if this intervention had not come into play. Because even if you say that you have a health center 3 in every sub-county, it is not feasible that you are going to have a health center in every household. It means that there is an issue of transport. Somebody has to leave their home to go to hospital in case they get unwell.
But Patrick, reality has to set in. We are talking about 25,000 Uganda shillings. 25,000 Uganda shillings.
Exactly.
Is it enough?
In my view, for the start, it is not necessarily enough, because somebody would think that, okay, that's probably not even a day's lunch for probably you and me. But you still need to look at the circumstances that we are working with. You will discover that over 70% of this population do not earn more than 7,000. More than 7,000 a day. You see, that's also very significant to look at. So the 25,000 may not be adequate, but it offers a very important starting point, because you need to look at the basic needs a household or an older person needs: salt, sugar, soap, and paraffin. There are people in this country who compose about 21.4% who are living in extreme poverty, to the extent that some of them, a significant number of them, cannot spend 10,000 in the entire year. So if a person like that is an older person who was not in a position to spend in the market 10,000 in the entire year, and he has got 25,000 per month.
All right, Patrick.
In my view, that's a short.
All right, Patrick. And at State House,
but
yes,
it could be enhanced, because in any case, this figure has been on for quite some time, and there's debate that this should be raised to 30,000 and progressively.
Raised to 30 and progressively.
To 30
but
and then to
let's
50,000.
interrogate lowering the age. You had the Minister for the Elderly, Sarah Kanyike, yesterday at the State House saying that this age should be lowered to at least 60. What do you make of this? Is it viable?
It is viable, and we have developed scenarios. You see, when this program as a pilot started at 65 years in the 14 districts in 2000, in 2013, and it was meant to go to each and every district that way. However, because of resource constraint, a decision was taken in 2015 to have 100 oldest persons in this country benefiting from this program. 100 oldest person per sub-county. That was not found realistic because of the limited resource pass. So now it went to 80 years and cover the whole, the whole country. Right now, the government says it cannot afford. Rightly so. But the resolution of Parliament and government at that time was that it should be progressive, that as resources become available.
So there is a chance the number could be lowered to 60.
It could be lowered to 60, but that could take some time.
But in the interim, Patrick Katabazi, my last question, what measures can be put in place to ensure social protection for our people in this country?
So one of the strategies is that we need to institutionalize social protection. We just not look at it as a project. We need to have it institutionalized. We need to make significant investment in that sector, because you realize that during COVID, we needed food supplies within the urban areas and some other places. You saw the problems that we had with it. So we need to develop a social protection system so that if an emergency strikes, we already have a vehicle that can deliver the items that we need to pass on, the money that we need to spend, so that at the end of the day we don't get caught unawares, but at the same time we appear to be more organized. So we need a social security system. We need to make significant investment in social protection. We need to reform our social security, ensure that it transforms into very, very realistic and benefiting products, because right now most of these are basically like provident funds, NSF and the rest. And then we need to have institutionalized social protection.
I'm afraid we've run out of time, but it is a very insightful conversation with Patrick Katabazi. He is the Executive Director for Center and Budget, that is for Center for Budget and Tax Policy. Many thanks for having made the time to speak to NTV.
The pleasure is mine. Thank you very much.
And of course, I'm getting word that Mr. Gilbert Agaba, the Manager Intellectual Property at the Uganda Registration Services Bureau, is already here to have a conversation on intellectual property or copyright. And also we shall be talking to Anthony Mwanda, the Restructuring Officer at the Uganda Performing Rights Society. We'll be right back.